This week on Africa Update, UN court orders Uganda to pay $325 million in reparations to the Republic of Congo. Burkina Faso prosecutors seek 30 years for Compaoré over Sankara's murder. TikTok fame wins Malawi singer 92 birthday party with president. And in sports, a static crowd greets Senegal winning squad as Macky Sall awards $87,000 cash and land. Hello and welcome to the week's edition of Africa Update, where we review stories from across the African continent. I am Ayubelia. Thank you for joining. EU chief unveiled a record investment pledge for Africa just a week away from the 6th European Union-African Union Summit. The European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen announced a more than $171 billion investment plan for Africa as she met with President Macky Sall. The EU chief was in Dakar to meet President Macky Sall. According to the EU chief, this is the very first regional plan on the Global Gateway, 2 months after the launch of the scheme. However, Ursula von der Leyen did not offer details about how the money will be raised or spent. The United Nations top court has ordered Uganda to pay the Democratic Republic of Congo $325 million in reparations over brutal war between the neighbors that began in the late 90s. The court notes that the reparation awarded to the Republic of Congo for damage to persons and to property reflects the harm suffered by individuals and communities as a result of Uganda's breach of its international obligations. The compensation order came more than 15 years after the UN court ruled in a complex 119-page judgment that fighting by Ugandan troops in the Republic of Congo breached international law. The sum awarded was well below the request for more than $11 billion in damages the Republic of Congo had demanded for the occupation of its volatile northeastern Ituri region. The court broke down the compensation into different categories of damages. Meanwhile, the United Nations Security Council expressed serious concern about the unconstitutional change of government in Burkina Faso in a statement more than 2 weeks after a military coup deposed President Roch Kabore. The 15-member council met behind closed doors to discuss the January 24th coup. In a statement agreed by consensus late on Wednesday, the Security Council called for release and protection of Kabore and other government officials. The coup in Burkina Faso was the latest in a series of military takeovers in Myanmar, Mali, Sudan and Guinea, and attempted coups in several other countries. Now, Guinea's Transitional Assembly, which is tasked with organizing a return to civilian rule after the military overthrow last year of President Alpha Condé, held its first session. All 81 members of the National Transitional Council, known by its French acronym CNT, were present for the inaugural session in Parliament buildings in the capital Conakry, AFP journalists said. The session lasted several hours and was opened by CNT President Dansa Koroma and in the presence of Transitional Prime Minister Mohamed Bavogui, a development expert. He called for a constitution to be drawn up that will not be easily modified, a reference to Condé, who had sparked fury by changing the constitution in order to run for a third term. Military prosecutors in Burkina Faso has requested a 30-year prison term for former President Blaise Compaoré for 1987 murder of his predecessor, revolutionary leader Thomas Sankara. A trial was launched into the killing last year after French authorities finally agreed to release military documents giving details of the circumstances of his death. The closely followed trial is almost at its climax as the West African nation reels from its latest coup following popular anger over jihadist attacks. The prosecution is seeking 30 years in jail for Hyacinthe Kamfado, who is suspected of having led the commando that murdered Thomas Sankara and his companions. 20 years in jail for Gilbert Dendere, the main defendant present at the trial and one of the army commanders during the 1987 coup. He is already serving a 20-year sentence over an attempted military coup in 2015. The trial was then adjourned until March 1 based on a request by the defense. Now, Mali's Prime Minister on Monday accused France of having sought the partition of the West African country during its military mission there, the latest flare-up in relations between Paris and Bamako. In a 45-minute speech to diplomats gathered at his request, Kokala Maiga denounced France, the former colonial power, and a vocal critic of the military regime that appointed him. But Maiga stopped short of calling for the departure of the anti-jihadist force that France leads in Mali. He acknowledged that France's military intervention in 2013 had halted a jihadist insurgency that had already captured the north of the country and threatened the south. The French operation later turned into a de facto partition of the country, he argued. Now, a South African court convicted and jailed twin brothers for terrorism over plans to attack the U.S. Embassy in Pretoria and join the Islamic State group, local media reported. Tony Lee Tulsi and Brandon Lee Tulsi, both 28, were arrested in South Africa in July 2016 and have been held in custody since. The South African brothers pleaded guilty as part of a plea bargain with the prosecution, according to local media. Hours later, the Johannesburg High Court gave Tony Lee an 11 jail term, while Brandon Lee was sentenced to 8 years. Both pleaded guilty to planning to travel to Syria to join IS, media reports said. Now, the government of Ethiopia's Afar region says more than 300 people have been displaced by warfare there since December, and it accused Tigrayan forces of killing civilians and looting. The United Nations has said that the fighting in Afar was blocking the delivery of food to neighboring Tigray region, where several 100,000 people are living in famine conditions. People are fleeing in absolute fear in all directions, said an aid worker in Afar who asked not to be named. War erupted in Tigray in November 2020, pitting the Ethiopian government and its allies, including Afar troops, against forces loyal to Tigray People's Liberation Front, which controls the region. You're watching Africa Update on Trust Television. Still ahead, TikTok fame wins Malawi singer 92 birthday party with president. Details and more after the break. Thanks for staying. Here's another look at the top stories again. The United Nations top court has ordered Uganda to pay the Democratic Republic of Congo $325 billion in reparations over a brutal war between the neighbors that began in the late 1990s. Military prosecutors in Burkina Faso has requested a 30-year prison term for former President Blaise Compaoré for the 1987 murder of his predecessor, revolutionary leader Thomas Sankara. And in other news, France opened a terrorism investigation into an attack on park rangers in northern Benin, in which a French national was among 8 people killed, while African country reported the death of another person in a fresh attack. The French government condemned the ambush in which 5 rangers, along with their French instructor, a civilian park employee, and a soldier were killed and 12 others wounded while on an anti-poaching mission in a national park. Benin authorities reported a new attack on Thursday in which 1 civilian park employee was killed when a reconnaissance patrol hit an improvised explosive device. The attack was the deadliest in a string of attacks since December in northern Benin, where groups linked to Al-Qaeda and Islamic State have spilled over from Burkina Faso and Niger. Now, rare interviews with captured members of jihadist group terrorizing northern Mozambique point to low morale in their ranks and to an insurgency that is losing steam in the face of Rwandan forces. The Rwandan army late last month let journalists interview some of the fighters that it had captured since launching operations in the troubled region last July. Linked to the so-called Islamic State, the extremist group has rampaged across towns and villages in northern Mozambique since 2017 with the goal of establishing a hardline caliphate. It is known locally as Al-Shabaab, although it has no link to the group with a similar name in Somalia. Yusuf Muhammad, a Mozambican member, said that the insurgents had lost ground in recent months. The militants never feared Mozambican soldiers, the detained fighter who appeared in his 20s said. But since Rwandan Defense Forces deployed in the country 6 months ago, they have started to get afraid and have become very weak. Now, Libya's divisions seemed poised to deepen on Thursday as the eastern-based parliament named a new prime minister, with the incumbent refusing to step aside. The move threatens to plunge Libya back to the split between two warring parallel administrations that governed from 2014 until a unity government was installed last year as part of a UN-backed peace plan. A spokesman for the parliament said it had chosen former Interior Minister Fathi Bashaga by a show of hands after the only other candidate withdrew. However, Prime Minister Abdulhamid Abdeldeba, who heads the UN-recognized government of national accord, has rejected the parliament's moves, saying he will only relinquish power after a national election. Uganda is preparing legislation to make COVID-19 jabs mandatory in a country with low levels of vaccination, a senior health official said. Legislation was now with Parliament and the Health Committee is scrutinizing it. The head of the National Immunization Program, Alfred Drewale, told Reuters. Uganda has a population of about 45 million people, but only about 12.7 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines have so far been administered, according to the Health Ministry. Uganda fully reopened its economy last month after 2 years of anti-coronavirus measures that included curfews, businesses and school closures, shutting of borders, grounding of vehicles, among others. The Mohammed International Airport in Casablanca has been buzzing for the past few hours after more than 2 months of closure due to COVID-19. Morocco reopened its airspace on Monday, 7th February. Despite the reopening, strict measures have been put in place to curb the spread of coronavirus. All travelers must be vaccinated on arrival. They are subjected to antigenic test and random PCR test carried out on groups of passengers. For those leaving the Moroccan territory, in addition to the vaccination pass, they must present a negative PCR test before boarding. Beyond these measures, this opening of the airspace after a long period of closure has been a real relief for passengers. Now, Malawian musician Gilles Chalamanda had never dreamt in his 92 years that he might one day be famous enough to dine with the president, followed by a night in a luxury hotel. Last month, the singer did both thanks to his unlikely new stardom on TikTok, a social media platform beloved of youths 4 generations removed from him, and one he can't access because he lacks a smartphone or even electricity to charge one. Chalamanda's ode to his daughter, Leni Ho, a chippy reggae tune with drums and synthesizers, got more than 80 million views on the video sharing site owned by China technology giant ByteDance. His fame launched his career locally with multiple paid requests to perform live, putting his small lakeside Southern African country on the digital map last month brought him to the attention of President Lazarus Chakwera, who threw a party for Chalamanda's 92nd birthday at the State House in Lilongwe. Now, finally, in sports news, Senegal arrived home on Monday after winning the Africa Cup of Nations to hundreds of thousands of ecstatic and chanting fans. Massive crowds of supporters descended on a military airport in the West African country's capital, Dakar, blowing vuvuzelas and waving flags to celebrate the victory. President Macky Sall was waiting at the airport to greet the returning players, who then paraded through thronged streets, sitting on top of a bus on their way to the presidential palace. The government had declared Monday a public holiday in order to celebrate the occasion. Senegal's President Macky Sall awarded the national football team cash prizes and plots of land on Tuesday, AFP reporters said. Sall announced a prize of the equivalent of some $87,000 for each team member, as well as a 200 square meters plot of land in Dakar and a 500 square foot plot in nearby city of Diamniadio. With that, we've come to the end of Africa Update for this week. Do join us next week for another time on the program. I am Iwelia. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.